All right. Well, so welcome to just another podcast. That this is the first. I'm so excited today because this is the first version of this podcast, and it's the journey to freedom. Is something that we are beginning to put together, and it's going to be a program that allows Black men to be able to look at their lives and to say, how can I journey to this thing called freedom? And we're going to do it in different parts. There's going to be a part which is an intensive boot camp. Hey, we're gonna get you to a freedom plan. Then we're going to do some different trainings throughout the year, as well as doing this podcast. And this podcast is going to feature several Black men who are being successful in different areas of their lives. We have different pillars. The pillar, I'm using this acronym called FITH to help us out, which is faith, identity, trust, health, and finances. And so we were going to put that all together just so that we can talk about these pillars, because they are like the cornerstones. These are the things, if we can master in our lives these cornerstones, and we can be able to show up as Black men in different situations in different ways that are different than what we may have been taught when we were growing up. When I think about times of growing up and having to deal with this is what my grandpa said I needed to be as a Black man, right?
Yep.
And today I have Coach Corn on, as you can hear him in the background. We're going to get in depth and talking about identity today, and I'm so excited that he's on. But going back to talking with my grandpa, and then my dad, talking about what it was like for him to grow up. I had a grandfather who, in my case, was a white man on my mom's side that married a Black woman in the 30s. So you can imagine what those conversations were like, and the things that they went through, and him being disowned from his family. And, they were a very successful family, ended up selling a soap company to what is now Ivory Soap, and, just a very wealthy family. And he decided to marry this Black woman that had a degree in music from Kansas State. And hearing that dynamic and what my dad had to deal with growing up, and in the poverty situation that they ended up in. And then on my grandma's side, she was she grew up on a reservation in Oklahoma, and so being part Native American, and then having the roots of slavery, but then all the different things that that I learned, and when I went to college, and the things that I went through, and not being, I'm from I guess a town in the what we call the West, is Colorado, is where I'm from, and I grew up, which has a very low density of Black population, but a very at one point, like when I was growing up, there was a very active Ku Klux Klan at that time, and seeing that, and wow. So. And if we fast forward to 2000s and all the things that have happened, and for us, as we're recording this, Martin Luther King Jr. Day was yesterday, and yesterday was a huge day, because that didn't exist when I was a child. It didn't exist. It's something that we've been able to progress to. And so when we think of freedom, Corn, I remember watching Roots when I was a kid. That came out, and trying to understand what happened in that whole, slave trade, and understanding that, and then different people talking during that time. And I had some roommates in college that were from Africa, and we watched Roots together in the late 80s. And they were like, what, that happened here? But all the things that have progressed, and the opportunities that we have today, and different, and how we need to show up. And, I think of, we're going to have some guests on that, a judge that is talking about our prison system and that kind of stuff. And so I am so glad, Corn, that you are on today. And I want to thank you for being on the show today, because I really want to talk about, where do we go from here? How do we progress into folks that have these incredible lives? That our freedom plans is not just a freedom. We're calling it our best life, because it's not just your best life or my best life. It's our best life because we are a community. A community that has issues with trust. When we talk about the
Yeah.
trust, not just trusting, whether it's, our white counterparts. Sometimes it's trusting each other. Sometimes it's
Yep.
trusting, the man and wife relationship, trusting our kid. We just have these trust issues that I think we can work through. We have some identity issues. Who are we? We've been told by several different people this term that we have called code switching that comes up all the time. I have a professor who's going to come on who did his whole dissertation based on code switching and things we have to do. So that's going to be exciting to have Dr. Chapman on to kind of talk about, we walk into different rooms, we walk into our jobs, we walk into our schools, we walk into the supermarket, and we have these different things. When it comes to money, Corn, this is going to be a big one when it comes to money, is because we found a way not to talk about our finances to other folks. And that's I guess counterproductive in our culture, but in other cultures, it's what rises people to success. It's their ability to sit in rooms with intimate communities and talk about where they're going, opening businesses, and where their finances are and changing. You see, Dave Ramsey get on and give all these ideas and examples, and then people in churches get into communities with his Financial Peace University, and they change their outlook on finances. And we stay in these communities we don't talk about because sometimes we feel shame or we're embarrassed or we don't feel that we're able to do that. So we want to make sure that we talk about that. When we think about health, it drives me back to the Tuskegee Airmen and thinking about all the experimentation that was done on folks of color, and just, us having higher blood pressures and having higher heart disease and having all these things that are because maybe, I don't know if it's hereditary or just because we had poor nutrition and poor health, or our diets weren't very good compared to some of the other folks. And so now we have all these health issues that we don't know how to deal with. And so, but what today, Corn, I really kind of want to talk about that identity piece. I really want to talk about what does it mean to be identity. And I know you've done some incredible work in this field, and it says right below you, it says Coach Corn, because that is what is your life skill. This is what you are incredible at. This is what you do, is coach people through a lot of these things. And so if you could kind of just, open up and share, a little bit of your background maybe, and then a little bit of what you're doing now. And we got time, so take your time, share why it is that you do what you do. And so, again, I so appreciate you being the first guest, on the Journey to Freedom podcast. So thank you. Go ahead.
Well, Brian, for those of you that are watching and listening to Brian, it's very clear how passionate he is about not only himself, his family, but others, moving towards freedom. And I hope that this is a part of what I've been describing with my own family, is how can we normalize certain conversations? So, Brian, I just hope that this becomes normal, that we're just having certain conversations, whether it be about our identity or our health or our finances or our family or our history, whatever it is, that these conversations aren't just happening in silos, but they're normal. They're happening everywhere. And the reason that I want to see these conversations get normalized is because they weren't happening. I'm grateful that you had them, but I grew up in a home, in the 70s and 80s where there was just conversations, they just weren't happening. Mm-hmm. So for example, I remember sitting in my living room taking in Tacoma, Washington, that's where I grew up. My family, like my dad and my mom, had migrated to Tacoma because of opportunity. I was born in Louisiana, Alexandria, small house. I looked at my home. I grew up in a shotgun house, and a shotgun house is a house that if you look through the front door, you can see through the back door. And if you were to shoot a shotgun, it would go directly through. So I was kind of started there. And again, by no means am I ashamed of any place or my journey and how I grew up, because it really shaped who I am today. But when we migrated to Tacoma, it changed their demographics, you know, so you kind of go up around family in a certain demographic, and then you go up and I didn't know the term minority, but, you know, I was a minority there in Tacoma. And so you're just trying to keep your head down. And my dad and mom are trying to put us in the best situation possible. And, you know, that meant that we had to endure a lot of things. And I didn't have these identity questions. We didn't have these identity conversations like, hey, the ones that you referenced, I wish I would have had those. Not that they didn't. I just think my parents were just trying to do the best they could to get us through. And so because I didn't, and because I've had to endure a lot, and really, Brian, I wasn't taught a lot about who I was and where I was from growing up. A lot of the work I did around my identity started because of pain. And truthfully, it really was because of a professor, Jim Hills, Dr. Jim Hills. I went to Western Baptist College, which is now Corbin University in Salem, Oregon. And I was a junior, and he was teaching a literature class and began to help me to fall in love with the reading.
Okay.
And so, you know, in the second grade, they wanted to move me up 2 grades because I tested off the charts. But by the time I had graduated from high school, I barely graduated with the 2.1. And so many things had transpired. But then when I finally got to college, and a lot of that had to do with my decision to become a follower of Jesus Christ, I had cleaned up my life and began to pursue some things. So when I got to college, and Mr. Hills, he got me to learn to read. And it was reading, Brian, that really was my access point to becoming aware of my identity. Because books were my access to truth. Books were my access to other people's lives. And so I became insatiable in devouring content about who I was. I mean, look, Know Thyself bookstore, which was in Tacoma, Washington back in the day, bro. I mean, I consumed content to try to understand how I arrived here, how we arrived here. Yes, there's this story of roots, but that doesn't tell our whole journey.
No, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, listening to you, it's this kind of like, man, I'm just fascinated by your journey. But I say all that to say that it was because of my experiences and pain, then me getting anchored in my faith identity in Jesus Christ, which then helped me to kind of clean up. I then moved into college, and I learned to read. And reading, Brian, if I would say to anyone that's listening, that was pivotal in my identity formation.
So just a quick question on the reading stuff, because they say who you become is based on your associations, your circle of friends, the people you hang around, and then what you consume as far as content, reading. You know, in these days, it's a lot of YouTube videos, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How did you pick what were you reading? Were you just reading everything, or did you have mentors and people in your life that said, read this book, this will help, or read this book? Or were you just showed up at the bookstore and from morning to night just reading? How did you figure out what was best to read?
I would probably say it was a combination of both. And so there were people growing that I really admired, and I would be somewhere and I would kind of listen to them and see what they read. One of the people that was so instrumental in my formation, there's two. One was my young life leader and the guy that mentored me. His name was Dave Hillis. And so Dave, he's white, but he invested, showed up in our space, and whatever he read, I read. So it was relational. But he then introduced me to this gentleman named Tom Skinner, the late Tom Skinner, who was the first Black man I've just been enamored with. He loved Jesus, and he had a command on history, economics, politics, theology. I'm telling you, man, probably the closest thing to him in my life today is probably Thomas Sowell.
Okay.
In terms of comps. And so whatever Tom read, I read, and he talked about history. So once they pointed me in the direction, I then just stayed on that journey. There was a couple things that I came across early on that I was curious about that I just read. And a lot of that had to do with business. And I think I was just curious about that. And so I just read a lot of business stuff. So a lot of history, Black history, because I didn't know a lot. And, shoot, Brian, growing up in the late 80s, 90s, there's a lot of anger. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of also to this self-awareness, again. So it was everywhere. So it was easy to grab a hold of stuff. And then the other thing too that was really instrumental, because when I went back to Tacoma after I graduated, I was doing Young Live, kind of share the gospel. And so one of the most influential movements at the time with young Black men that I was working with was the Nation of Islam in Tacoma. So again, because that was influencing the culture, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't reacting emotionally. And so I had to do a deep dive. So that strategy to know for myself before I say has been the kind of the pattern with anything. So I might seek out somebody else's, but man, you know what? Now with the internet, Brian, like this is honest God truth. Like I go to Davos. Davos is they convene every year. And so I'll go on there and look at what they're reading, people there, and then I'll go read. Then I'll listen to you and listen to what is Brian talking about, and then I'll go read. I'll go read hey, what are the top 10 business books in the world? And I'll start reading. And so it's really about accessing. But I would say this, reading continues to be my portal. And the reason being is I know there's a lot of podcasts and whatnot, even we're doing one, but I have to cite the source. Mm-hmm. Man, yeah. I have to know for myself. And that's just one of those.
I totally. One of the things that, and you've kind of alluded to this, as we're creating our identity and where you grew up, and was there, I think of the Black church, and I think of, my journey, and you said something about pain, and the conversations we had around identity in our family were because somebody wrote, a word on our garage door, because my dad was part of an affirmative action program and decided that we should move out to the suburbs here in Colorado. So we're in the suburbs. My elementary school had 3 Black children. My sister was one of them, and then Ernie Pitts. So there was 3 of us in my elementary school. There was 9 of us in my junior high and 35 of us in our high school. And so whenever there was a thing like Roots that came out or something else, there would be, backlash. And that's why we had to have these identity, conversations. So I guess some of it came out of pain. But then I can also remember being part of different churches and different, faith is a huge part. And we started out, at a all-white church. And then we went to a Nazarene church. And then my dad said, we need to have culture. So we went to the AME church. And what a culture shock from being in a junior high youth group for me at an all-white church. And we're doing ministry at Mexico, or we're going down to, I think the Navajo reservation and doing stuff there, and all of a sudden, my dad decides that we're going to go to this AME church. And then I get the experience of what it means to be in a Black church and create identity in Black. Yeah. Did you have any of those experiences where you were indoctrinated or put in? I know you talked about the Nation of Islam and just trying to understand and read, but were there people around at that time too? Or was it just the books and stuff that you were reading? how did that portion of who your identity was formed?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say for me, I did not have that influence of the church. The church was not an institution that shaped identity for me. Man, honestly, I would say again, it's books. You know, the other one for me too, Brian, was music.
Okay.
Uh, in Tacoma, where I grew up, we had Fort Lewis Army, McCord Air Force. And so I was around and exposed to a lot of people from the East Coast. Okay. So here I am, a West Coast kid. And for those of you that are listening, one of the huge influences for us in the West was the sound coming out of, California. Mm-hmm. Man, it was a huge influence back in the day. The other influence for me was Public Enemy.
Okay.
And so music really tapped into this love of self, become aware of self. And so it wasn't necessarily the church, but it was those portals. And then there was the relational ones. As I grew up and now I live in Atlanta, Georgia, I can say I've had different experiences. But the formative time was probably my relationship with my young life leader, Dave, and his faith. He exposed me to different people. One of the people, Brian, that was really kind of larger than life in my formation as a leader was Verley Sangster.
Okay.
And Verley Sangster actually lives in Denver, Colorado. Mm-hmm. And so here he is. I remember when he was the second in charge, the vice president of all of Young Life. And that was a big deal. So I would probably say the Verleys and people from Young Life are more formative than the institution of the church, because that's where I spent a lot of my time. And they kind of took me under the wing and, they invested in me. And so, again, it just gave me access. Because, man, when you're one of few, and, going from Nazarene Church to AME, I mean, like, man, Brian, that's a huge jump. Hey, there was no like cheat code or hack to know how to navigate new cultures. You're just in it. I'm curious to you, how did you navigate the switch from one culture to another as it related to your faith?
Well, and that's where I think the identity really came true for me, or really came important to me, because I didn't know who I was. Okay. I'm this Black kid that by the time I got to high school, I'm a really good athlete. So yep. I'm now, I think of the other Black kids that were in my high school that didn't have it as easy as I did because they weren't athletes. They That's weren't fair. Looked upon as, hey, we want you to hang out with us. I don't think it was because they wanted anything to do with my culture. It was because I'm this good athlete that they want to hang out with, right? So I was lucky in that. But then when I think about, my faith journey, my mom had told me early that God had a purpose for my life, and it was going to be something that was special. And I was trying to figure that out. And when you brought up music, I remember, because you and I are, I think we're actually the same age. And so, I'm thinking of like, I'm trying to listen to Michael Jackson, and I'm trying to listen to, whatever that the pop culture is, right? Yeah. But at the same time, trying to listen to, the Commodores and Earth, Wind and Fire, and, excited about Earth, Wind and Fire because they're from Colorado. And then, just thinking of, what that is and saying, I want some of the culture. And so I would even, venture to find neighborhoods in Colorado where I could have kids that would be associating, so I could find out what that culture was like. And so the AME church was an experience. It was, hey, this is so much different than where we're at. And, whether it was the music that was being sung there, which was huge. The way that, was worship, the first time I'm seeing folks that are, worshiping and the charismatic or the the Pentecostal, I guess I should say, and all the ladies in the church who were wearing the white hats and the white things, and the moms of the church who were then, and and the way that they would bring me in and talk to me, and hey baby, we want to, that I think helped with my influence of who Jesus was. Yep. I saw from one side who Jesus was on serving and giving, and that's what the white church was giving. I saw who Jesus was as compassionate and loving and caring from the black church. And so those were the two differences that I think for me that kind of helped shape that identity. Being rooted in Christ either way, it was, seeing those different sides where I saw a lot more struggles from the folks in the AME church. Everybody was going through something all the time. We were just going through, where at the white church, it was, the offering plate got passed and it was filled up, and there was more programs, and there was more, ability and access to money that gave access to us going on like a singing tour. I can't sing worth a lick, but somehow they thought I could sing well enough to go to this singing tour and sing on all these little churches, because we were able to do that in that setting. Whereas in the AME church, it was always, hey, we just need a little bit more. I can remember like a building fund that took, 4.5 years or whatever. And the thermometer just moved, those thermometers, I remember those that just moved a little bit each time, and just every week, the building fund, and just seeing how that went. So, I see that in, whoever's these identities are, but then we look at today. What is the church like today, and where do people find that it did? Because faith is such a big part of who we are. And if we're experiencing our faith through somebody else, how do we find our own identity in what that faith is? And I don't know, maybe you could speak to that as far as, through Young Life and that kind of stuff, or how are you helping people as Coach Corn find their own identity that's not just through the people, their moms or their dads, or the people who are really involved?
Yeah, I would say, Brian, one, as we think about this podcast being specifically geared towards the education and the equipping of Black people, I would say that our faith formation did not start with Martin Luther. I think when you go back to the early church fathers, you'll begin to see that there were people that look like us that were very formative in the creeds that shape faith development. I know the Jude 3 project does a great job of helping people become aware of the role of Blacks in the shaping of our faith. And I think that's really formative. I just think if people don't read, research, it does then lead them dependent on others and experiences for their faith formation. And so I would say one of the things is, how do we help people? How do I, Cornelius Williams, help people really understand the truth, understand history as a part of their faith formation? And I had to look to others, and there are people who've done a lot of research. And I would say the other thing too is my celebrating of who I am should not be an excuse to become the thing that I despised. Right. And so as I elevate, and I love who I am. I love who God created me to be. I am a spirit-filled, descendant of those who survived the diaspora. That's a fact. I can go back and look at my history and see that. And so God made me who I am today with my pigmentation in this point in history. That is not a coincidence. And I celebrate that. I love that. Now, there are some challenges. that come with who I am because of my pigmentation, because I'm 6'3", I'm male in the United States. But I don't look at it as a knock against me, regardless of the narrative that might be put out there. I've done my work to understand who I am so that I can move about in life in a healthy way. And that, I mean, I hope that as the work you're doing and anyone listening to this, that you would embark upon this journey of identity to celebrate who you have been created, but not to oppress, but to set others free. You know, and that, Brian, is what we need to normalize. I mean, I want that. And so I can then move in spaces where I am a minority, but my head is not hung down. I mean, there's not the same type of maneuvering that I used to have prior to doing this identity work. I can walk into any room, right? Now I'm fully aware of what it means when I show up in space. Mm-hmm. But it's what I'm getting back is not the whole story, because the story starts here. It starts with my faith. It starts with me embracing my history, my identity, and all that goes with that. So I do think that I hope that people that are listening would do their work, be secure in who they are, because if you aren't, then you aren't free.
Wow, that is so profound what you're saying. And one of the things that, and I want to get to this because I know there's a call to govern project that you're working on that talks about this identity. But I hear sometimes in our culture and in our world is this word called trauma, and the things that we grew up, and you kind of talked about pain when you were growing up, and the things that shape who we are based on outside influences that sometimes we dismiss as not being, something that influenced me in some ways, or it becomes this burden, this thing that we put on our back that we carry with us, as if we have to show up to everywhere we go as that person who experienced that trauma or whatever. What can you say to folks that are trying to figure out who they are, that have this, whether they had an abusive, childhood, in some cases, where we're calling trauma is just the fatherless home, that had been created, that, mom was trying to do everything, the breadwinner, the person who did, dad wasn't present in the family, and they just did the best that they could, mom being at work, kids raising kids, that kind of stuff. Those influence of the struggle. What can you say for that trauma that can bring? Because I definitely want to get into the call to govern and the identity and who we are, but I think maybe we need to address some of that. How do we get through that trauma piece?
Yeah, I would say off the rip, first and foremost, man, I believe in therapy. Mm-hmm. Let me just say,
amen.
hey, man, let me just say, man, I believe in therapy. And what is it? I believe it's important to sit with those who are trained, who understand the nuances associated with our culture, that can help us to begin to unpack it. Why? So that we can begin to move past it. So I would say definitely we need to do our work in therapy. Two, and this is, I think, the hard work, it's finding community. I'm grateful for those of you that are watching this, listening to this. I'm grateful to sit in places where, like, I've sat in physical proximity to Brian. Great conversation. And in those conversations, which did not happen immediately, through several, there's this permission that I've given myself and others to converse in a way that helps me move past trauma. And so do not think that this is a white-black issue. I live in the Metro Atlanta area. I'm in the majority in a lot of places. However, there's still people that look like me that are hurting me, and that is the result of they haven't done their work, which is why we must do our work. So therapy creates spaces where you can have normalized certain type of conversations. Definitely, I could pray. I continue to live by the book. But those, I would just say, if you're listening, man, we have to do our work. I'll tell you this, I cannot change another human being on the earth.
Amen. Amen.
And so I have to wake up every day doing my work and trying to live out the freedom that has been extended to me. And that is work. And so the other thing too that I'd say, going back to your, hey, having grown up a certain way, is this. I would, for those of us that grew up in very challenging spaces, the work of therapy and conversations have helped me to see that most people were doing the best they can with what they had.
Yes, absolutely.
And me being able to say that took a lot of work, a lot of forgiveness, but it also can free others up. Man, look, I don't want to stay there. They did the best they can with what they had. God bless them. If they had access to what I had access to, they may have made different choices. They may or may not. But I can't keep holding on to that narrative, because it becomes an anchor that keeps me from moving freedom. And again, if you're listening to this or watching this, there are people you're trying to make peace with. They're not here anymore. Talk to a therapist, create whatever process that is necessary for you to put a period instead of a semicolon. The semicolon it's stopped, but it's still going. And man, we need to put some periods in places so that we can begin to move forward. I'm not here to prescribe what that pace looks like for another human being, but I do know we want to move forward. And I do hope conversations with, what you're doing, Brian, leads to that. And so, I'd say this to you, Brian, just by way of, as you're trying to steward this, if we need to come back at a later date to unpack Call to Govern, I mean, hey, I'm here. What I think is really important is, as it relates to identity, that we need to do our work. We need to do our work. We need to do our work as individuals. We need to do ourselves as a family, because I do believe that family is the building block of any society. So, man, we can't even get past our own family. And then that family work could spill over into work, could spill over to the community, and spill over into the cities. But it really does go back to who we are, who our identity, who we are as an individual, who we are as family, who we are as community. And so I think this is a great work. If we're going to move towards freedom, we've got to do this identity work.
Absolutely. So when I look in the mirror, so I get up in the morning and I look in the mirror and I see me.
Yep.
And that me that I see is a work in progress. It's not necessarily, it's always going to be a work in progress. It's always going to be somebody that I want to be different. But if I'm not liking what I see, and I think that happens for a lot of people, for all of us at one point in our time. We don't like some of the decisions that we've made. We don't like some of the people that we've hung out with. We don't like the way that we've treated others in some other places. And we look at that in the mirror and we start this thing called shame, which I think is probably the worst emotion known to man, is this thing called shame, because it puts so much on us that says that we're not good enough, or God has made me somehow inferior, or hasn't made me, there's something wrong with me. How do I begin to now look at that person in the mirror and see possibilities instead of seeing failures?
Yeah. Ooh. I mean, your language was really good. Again, there are a lot of people out there who've done a lot of work, and I would encourage anyone, please talk to therapists, do your research on those who have studied shame. I am not an expert in shame. I'm a person who's had to manage it in my own journey. And so I'll speak from that place. And I would say, I'm not broke.
Okay.
I've made bad decisions. I mean, I made a lot of bad decisions.
We all have, right? Yes.
Yes, I don't have all the requisite skills. I don't have all the requisite information. Um, but to think that I am broke or inferior, that's an assessment of my person. And I would say, whether you are a follower of Jesus Christ or not, you have been created in the image of God. That doesn't mean you worship God or you're a follower of Jesus Christ. That's my faith decision. But it doesn't change that everyone has been created in the image of God. Now, the choices we make as image bearers, the skills that we have as image bearers, the things that we've experienced as image bearers can contribute to the shame we feel, but that doesn't change the truth that we've been created in the image of God. So as we go to mirror, I would say, hey, let's start with that premise, that I am created in the image of God. And there are things that I'm not pleased with about my decisions, about my skills, about my situations, which then leads to okay, if that's true, what do I need to do? Who can I ask for help to change the consequences of choices, to change my circumstances as best as I can? But to continue to go to the mirror going, I am bad, I'm unworthy, I am broke, I am damaged, goes against, at my core, and this is the result of a lot of work. We have all, everyone on this earth has been created in the image of God. Again, hear me again. We all, Black, white, Native American, Asian, I mean, we have all been created in the image of God. We do not treat ourselves or others always like image bearers, but that doesn't change the fact that we are. So I would say to you, when you go to the mirror, Brian, in the morning, start with the fact that I am an image bearer. I have been created in the image of God. I do not like man, look, Brian, I need to lose weight, man. I told you I was running late because I need to drink more water. So how I physically look, which is the result of my decisions, I can change. My person is an image bearer. So yes, I said it again and again and again and again, because I want people to get that. Because if you don't understand that, then you will react and think that I am, and then, and that's what shame does. It comes for your person, not your choices, not your skill set, not anything else. It comes for your person, and that is evil.
Yeah, because it almost doesn't allow you to move on. It doesn't allow you, if you can start with the premise that I am an image bearer, I am a creator. God created me in His image. He created me to create instead of to destroy. And so when we start going through that, we start thinking about that. That's when we can do stuff. You can't just say, "Hey, I'm just going to go back to school and get another skill," because the skill that you get, if you have the premise of I am this person, or I am, this is who I am, that skill then translates to that person. And so the identity has to change. And whether it's through therapy or through people or associations or people you're hanging out with, that's got to be. And what I love what you did is you started with an affirmation. You started saying, I am an image bearer. I am God's child. I am. Those are the things that begin that process that then allows you to become have that belief that I am truly what I can become. I guess I don't believe I am right now, but I can become what God created me to be. And I think that's so huge in our identity conversation is I'm not all those things that people said I was.
That's right.
Throughout whatever age you are, however much time you spend, however many days you've been on the planet, people have been telling you who you are. And hopefully, the ones that have told you that you are the greatness that's in you, because we are all born for greatness, I believe, those are the ones you held on to. But it's so much easier to hang on to those negative things that people say that you are. In my case, I had a learning disability. And I was told as a young child that I wasn't going to amount to what others were because
Wow.
I wasn't able to read. I wasn't able to,
Wow.
and so that became part of who my identity was. Unfortunately, through sports and athletics and
Yeah.
other things that I was able to do well, that trumped that belief that I'm not enough. But every time I still go down to write, right, that's something I got to fight. That's that work that you bring.
Yes. Yes.
Because the belief is I can't write well because somebody in third grade told me I couldn't write well. Well, I'm going to write a book, right? And it's well written with the proper grammar, whatever it is. It's going to happen, and hopefully people will read it. And so those are some of those things. Are there instances, Corn, in your life that have helped you shape that belief that you are now an image bearer? That you are, what are some of those things? Because I know we can't change everybody. We can just tell our own stories. But what are some of those things that have helped you that may be able to help somebody else move to that identity that is one that I was created by God in his image?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, Brian, it really stemmed from my belief in Jesus the Christ and the scripture. And that was going back to, remember how I was saying I used to read? And as I did a deep dive and studied the word of God and studied who Jesus is and began to really sit in what the word was saying to me about who I was in Christ, it was diametrically opposed to the message I was getting from the world. And so that is where listening to others teach me the truth from the word, and then juxtaposing that against what I have read in history, it really, really, really helped. And then this is where therapy came in, because I had to do my work to kind of go, I had these messages, these tapes that were saying one thing, I had the words saying another thing, and there was this dissonance. And so really a lot of my work in therapy and in conversations has been to try to align my life with the truth that is from the Bible. And that has been a lot of work. I mean, even the conversations, I spend time with young kids, these young men, I spend time with the men, they're in the 7th and grade, and some 6th graders. And I'm trying to make sure that what's on their tape, what's playing in their mind, is what the word of God says about them. I'm trying to get that message to them early. And it's not just a self-help. No, this goes back to the identity. This is who you are as followers of Jesus Christ at 12, at 13. Now, how do we live that out? That's the freedom you're talking about, Brian. Mm-hmm. That's the freedom. They don't have to get to where we did to learn the things we learned. It's incumbent upon us as community members to pass along to them the truth. I'll leave you with this, man, Brian. One of the things that it says, here's the principle: who you are comes out where you're at. I say it all. Who you are comes out where you're at. If you're a jerk, I can drop you anywhere. At some point, the jerk's going to come out. But that principle comes from Deuteronomy 6. It says in Deuteronomy 6, let these laws, commandments, decrees be upon your heart. Moses is talking to the adults. And then you're supposed to teach them to your children. When you get up in the morning, as you're going along the way, write them on the tablets of your hearts, write them on your hands. And so the principle is this: whatever downloads, whatever the commands, decrees, the principles that you're downloading, inputting, holding on to, they're going to come out. And they're going to come out as you're going to work, as you're having conversations, as how you go about what you do. And so, what's incumbent upon us is that we would download, we would integrate, we would embrace the truth that is from Jesus the Christ, the word of God, in us, and teach them live them, converse with them, So I am a greatly appreciative both of this podcast and the good work. If y'all don't follow Brian, he can say how you can follow him on social media, because every day he's putting out great content, trying to get people to say yes to who they are in Jesus and to move from that place to greatness. I would encourage you to follow him. He's doing a great job of trying to make sure in his own way that you're getting the downloads, some Deuteronomy 6, some thoughts that are encouraging, that are counteracting the narratives that have been put forth in society that are inconsistent with us as image bearers. So follow Brian, listen to him, get in your book. But I would say, Brian, it's that who you are comes out where you're at. So I need to do the work. But I am making sure, the reason I'm a coach, the reason I do what I do, is I'm trying to offer a different narrative.
Oh, I like that.
To image bearers. Mm-hmm. Because in my little tagline, I'm trying to make good louder.
I like that. Making good louder.
I'm trying to amplify it, talking good, having good conversations, but good is anchored in God. And so I may not always say Deuteronomy 6, but the truth and the principles are from the word. And so Brian, I'll say, man, it is just great. Hey, I would put a comma here. Let's come back sometime to C2G, but I hope that the listeners and those who are watching really take heed to what you're trying to do in terms of moving towards freedom, and that they would find their identity as image bearers in Jesus, but begin to do their work each and every day with downloads. So
I love it. I have one more quick question for you, that maybe because you made me think of something as you were talking about that. And I was thinking about you're talking about downloading and soaking in and getting all the right information to do Deuteronomy 6 stuff, and then it leads me to the scripture that talks about guarding your heart. How do we? And I think it was our friend Art that told me that the barbershop in our culture is the place where community happens, right? But it's not always the positive things that are being said that are in the barbershop. And he said, if you spend more than 30 minutes at a barbershop, then you spent too long. That was just one of the comments that came out, because of all that you hear and all the things that are part of the world. And I'm sure there's some barbershops that you'd want to spend all day at. But just thinking about that, guarding your heart, how do you stop, or how do you move away from some of that negative stuff that then, contradicts or countermeasures, or whatever the word is that I'm looking for, the soaking in of all the good stuff, and then having that radiate through you? How do we guard it so that the other stuff isn't penetrating that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The anchoring verse to the group of guys is Psalms 119:9. It says, how does a young man keep his way pure? How does a young person keep? By obeying the word. And so the thing that I would start by saying, one of the ways that we can guard our hearts is that we must all be diligent in developing a filter system or worldview. And that is around our values and some principles. If you're an adult, it would be incumbent upon you to take a step back and really be clear about what you value. If you're a younger person, you can get some help with this. But then there's this idea out here called decision filters. And Brian, you're a homeowner. And so this idea of guarding your heart is really about identifying the filter that things will go through. So because I'm clear about my values, and some things I'm called to do on this earth, I can't go everywhere. I can't listen to everything. And I would say this, I can go into a barber shop because of the work I've done in developing my worldview and my filter. I know that people don't think like I do. That's okay. They're entitled to their opinion. I can ask them to cite their source, and I can begin to go in and have conversations if necessary, because I've done my work of knowing who I am,
Oh, wow.
which is the identity. And so you're going back to this whole premise of this topic today is it's your identity work. Your identity has to have a filter. You guard your heart by doing your due diligence and being clear about your values, being clear about what you believe, so that you can know what should get through and not get through. So that's what I would say. It's not easy, but guarding your heart above all else, has to be intentional.
Wow. Hey, that is so good, because it brings us to more things we're going to talk about, right? We have to talk about values, and we have to be able to say, how do we develop those values? What are those values to us? In the trust work that we're going to be doing, that I encourage you to be part of, we're going to create a trust shield. And
Good.
the mid portion of that trust shield is your values. What do you hold? Because if you don't know what those values are, if you are not crystal clear, then that filter doesn't work. It's like you forgot to put half of the filter into the engine so it keeps out the dirt that are there. When I love when you brought that with the barbershop, I can go into a barbershop because I already have my filter. I already have my principles. I already have those things that are my armor or my shield that
Yes.
allow me not to soak in some of the things that people are saying. You're like, what did you just say? Where did that come from? Where
Right.
If you don't have that, oh yeah, that makes sense. That goes, oh yeah, I get that. And then we get confused, and then we walk around with these identities that we're not sure of who we are, because we haven't put those values properly in place. And our values are shaped by those associations, those books that we read, the content that we put into our mind, the things that we do when we get home on a daily basis. And so we are going to continue this conversation. I promise you that. And I want you to subscribe to this channel, because I promise you we are going to give some content that is going to go over exactly how to do all these things. And Corn, I just so appreciate you spending the time today and letting us just get into your mind a little bit. And I can't wait to have you back on because it's so important that we do with this. And we talk about these 5 pillars, faith being one. We kind of talked about today. We didn't talk a lot about finances today, but I promise you, we are going to get into finance. We're going to talk about identity. We are going to talk about trust. We are going to talk about health. We talked about that a little bit today. And so we are going to spend some time putting those things together so that your shield, guarding your heart, is there so that you can soak in all of this wonderful things that can create that identity. And so I appreciate you guys listening to our first episode. This is the Journey to Freedom podcast. We've had Coach Cornelius Williams on today. We will have him back. Please, I will put some stuff down in the descriptions so that you can figure out how to be a part of. If you go to it's called the Freedom Plan, thefreedomplan.us, and you can do that right now, and they'll be able to let you register for a Zoom meeting, whether it's recorded or live, that will kind of give you insight into how to start getting involved. There will be flyers that are up there. The journey, right now we have a flyer up for today is August 15th. On the 26th, we're going to do a Zoom meeting that's going to talk about these 5 things and how you can get involved, because you're going to want to get involved. And for those of you who are want to go at this fast pace, we are going to have something for you. So I want you to be part of that. So thank you again for getting in. This is Brian Arnold. I love the fact that we're talking. I want you to have those conversations. I want you to be thinking about your community, and want you to think about who your identity is. When you look in the mirror today, I want you to know that you're born for greatness, and you were created in God's image. You were created in God's image, and that is an amazing image to be created in. So you guys have an awesome, wonderful day. And we will look forward to talking to you on the next one.